I've talked many times before about the importance of rotation when we're walking. It's not just that rotation is important, it's really required. We can't move without rotation. It's really just a question of whether you are conscious or unconscious of what your rotation is and whether you're rotating incorrectly or correctly. Tai Chi Great Grandmaster Doc Phi Wong once wrote that all movement is guided by the waist. When the waist starts moving, the rest of the body should start moving. When the waist stops moving, the rest of the body should stop moving. Someone recently asked me the question of how much rotation do we need to do? That is a great question from someone trying to go from unconscious rotation to conscious rotation. So let me answer that question in this video. How do we know how much rotation we need to do? And the other question, how fast do we need to rotate in order to move functionally? First, let me answer the question of how fast we need to rotate. When we rotate, we're rotating three elements of our core. Our upper core from the upper abdominal muscles, our lower core from our lower abdominal muscles, and then our hip muscles also contribute to rotation. The speed that we rotate is going to determine how fast we move. The key is trying to coordinate all three levels of the core at the same speed. This is not difficult to do because it only requires using the correct intention of movement. When I say intention, what I mean is what we're intending to do. And in this case, what we need to intend to do is keep vertical as we walk. If we rotate our upper waist faster than the lower waist, we're going to tip forward because the upper abdominal muscles flex the spine forward. If we rotate our lower waist faster than our upper waist, then the body is going to tip backwards because your lower abdominal muscles rotate your pelvis posteriorly or backwards. So in order to define the correct speed of movement, we really just have to balance out the rotations of our upper waist, lower waist, and our hips so that we remain vertical. It's really not possible to imbalance the speed because as you're moving, if you start to pitch forward, you'll end up stopping walking. You won't be able to continue progressing if you are not coordinating your upper and lower. The more common issue is doing incorrect rotation, not doing improper coordination of the speed of rotation. Now let me answer the question, how much do we need to rotate? This question is a little bit more complicated than the question of how fast we need to rotate, but it still uses the concept of intention. If we move correctly, we are rotating in the correct fashion. So if you know what the walk technique is you're trying to do, then all you need to do is do that and you will be rotating correctly. However, if you're trying to get more consciousness of how your rotation is affecting your walk, then that can sometimes throw off your timing, just like when somebody's trying to learn a new dance. So to answer this question about how much rotation is required, I need to go into a concept from the walking code called equilibrium positions. Every movement we do uses a combination of rotation from the three elements of the core. And when we engage those three elements in a particular combination of rotation, it's going to move the body to a certain position. And when that position is reached, the body is going to stop moving even though we are continuing to rotate. Let me use a Tai Chi exercise to give you an example of equilibrium positions. It's easier to do this with a Tai Chi exercise because both feet are on the ground. When we're walking, we are not really in a place where we can stop at any point naturally and turn to the camera and point something out. So it'll be easier to demonstrate this using a Tai Chi example. So I'm going to give you the example of a motion called press followed by push. When I do the movement of press, I'm rotating my left upper core forward, I'm rotating my left lower core backwards, and I'm flexing my left hip, meaning I'm pulling my left hip forward during this motion. If I turn my left upper abdominal muscles faster than the other parts of the core, what will happen immediately is I will begin to pitch over. And so it's pretty easy not to do that because I know I'm trying to move forward in a vertical fashion. If I were to use my lower abdominal muscles faster than my upper abdominal muscles, I would immediately start to pitch backwards. So I wouldn't be able to accomplish what I'm trying to do. Likewise, if I use my hip flexors and pull forward faster than I'm rotating my waist, it's going to tip the body forward because of that forward pitch of the hip flexors. When I use all of the muscles in proper coordination, I'm going to shift forward with the proper intention of keeping a vertical posture during that whole shift. Now let me talk about equilibrium positions. As I shift forward, I'm going to reach a point where my movement stops. Even though I am continuing to pull my knee forward by flexing my left hip, I am continuing to rotate my upper core forward, and I'm continuing to rotate my lower core or lower abdominal muscles backwards. I have not stopped moving, but I've reached a point of equilibrium where this particular combination of rotations can no longer cause the body to change position. So that's why I call it an equilibrium position. I've reached a state of equilibrium, and in order to change or to start a movement, I need to change one element of the core, one or more elements. In this case, when I go from press to push, I am going to change the hip flexion to hip extension. And that is what is going to change this motion to this motion. One of the Tai Chi essential principles is to move with continuous flow. This requires us to know when we have to make the change from one pattern of core movement to another. Otherwise, when we get to the end or this equilibrium position, we're going to freeze, and then we'll have a stop, and then we'll have to restart ourselves. When people perform Tai Chi very smoothly, they know how to transition from one motion to the next motion, and they know what it is they need to do in order to make that change happen. They may know consciously or unconsciously, but they're able to make the change at the right moment. And so what we're doing here is shifting forward with press, and as soon as my movement stops, I continue the flow by extending my hip, changing press to what we call push. That is how we transition from one equilibrium position to another. When we're walking, the same dynamic is going on. We have three functional phases of the gait, meaning three phases of gait where the same core pattern of movement is being used throughout one phase, and in order to move to the next phase, we have to change one or more elements of the core. And in the case of normal walking technique, each phase change is going to require just one element of core change. So let me go through the three phases of gait and the changes we need to do to transition from one to the other. If you do these phase changes at the correct timing, you will have better flow when you walk. Let me start with the heel placement on the ground. This is the beginning of the loading response phase that goes from the heel placement all the way until my forefoot reaches the flat position. During the loading response, I am using my lower abs on my left, I'm using my upper abs on my left, and I'm pulling forward with my right hip, meaning right hip flexion. If I were power walking, I could be pushing forward with my right hip, but that's for another discussion. So I am using core rotation on my left side, upper and lower, and hip flexion. As soon as my toe hits the ground, that is the end of this natural movement. If I continue rotating on my left side and continue lifting my right hip forward, there's no further movement that's going to happen. I could force it and try to lift my toe off the ground, but I'm going to have to put it back because there's no natural movement at this point. I have to change something to move forward. That is going to be the activation of my hip on my left side. I'm currently activating my right hip. I'm now going to activate my left hip, and that's what's going to begin the change from loading response to the initiation of the swing through. Side view, loading response. As soon as my toe hits the ground, I need to activate the hip to begin the swing through, that forward leg hip. If I don't do it with correct timing, you're going to get some stops and starts. I can stop here and then I don't move until I engage something else. This is where people often make the wrong decision, and they stop and they engage a tilt of the body to try to get them to move forward, because they don't realize what part of the core is really necessary to begin that next part of the forward movement. So when we do it correctly, at the end of loading response, we're going to engage the forward hip to bring us forward. This second phase of the movement, which is going to move us through mid-stance, is going to get us to the point where our swing leg is forward and our rear leg heel is still on the ground. And my left arm will be swinging forward with my right leg. My heel is still off the ground on the right, and my heel is still on the ground with the left. That is the end of the mid-stance equilibrium phase. In order to transition smoothly from the end of mid-stance to the beginning of heel contact with the swing leg, we need to move another part of the core, and that is going to be the upper part of the waist. When I hit mid-stance, I am engaged on the left side of my core when my right leg is swinging forward. So I'm turning forward with my left upper abdominal muscles, turning backwards with my left lower abdominal muscles, and I'm pulling forward with my left hip. That is going to be the end of this portion, or the mid-stance portion of gait. Now I need to understand what to do to put my heel down properly, and that is going to be rotating the upper part of my waist or core on the right forward and retracting it on the left, and that's going to bring my heel down, which brings me to our initial heel contact position that we started. At this point, now in order to engage the loading response phase at the right timing, all I need to do is tuck the pelvis on the right, activating my lower abdominal muscles. Remember, at the end of this phase, when I put the heel down, I am now rotating forward on my right, I am rotating backwards on my left, and I am pulling forward with my left hip. Now I'm just going to simply tuck the lower abs on the right, release the lower abs on the left, and that gets me through the loading response phase. From the side view, after I've placed my heel, I'm going to tuck the lower abs, and that is going to pull me forward. I was already turning forward on the right side of the upper core. Now I've turned backwards with the right side of the lower core, and I did not need to change anything with my hip action because it was already flexing at this point, and it continues flexing as I pull myself forward with my lower abdominal muscles. That gets us through the loading response phase and is the timing again for initiating our forward hip initiation to execute the swing phase of the gait. How much do we need to rotate the core when we walk? The answer is enough to get to the next position. Rotating more won't move the body any further. Rotating less won't get the body to the desired position. The key is knowing what position you're trying to reach and how to transition smoothly to the next position.